Mike Peterson here. Made a mistake last time on one of my videos for KubeVirt, called it nested virtualization. So I wanted to get corrected by someone who's actually in the community and can give us a little bit of information on like what KubeVirt is. So I'm here with Andrew. So Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself? What do you do? Where do you work?
Sure thing, yeah. So my name's Andrew Burden. I am the community facilitator for KubeVirt. I work for Red Hat. And yeah, basically most of my job is to make sure that we have a healthy, sustainable, and welcoming community in this project.
All right, so I guess the first question is, what is KubeVirt?
What is KubeVirt? So KubeVirt is an extension of Kubernetes and the API there to allow for virtual machines and virtualization resources to be natively able to run side along your container workloads. I think in a nutshell.
So did you do anything with like LibVirt or anything like that before this job? Like were you OpenStack and then came into Kubernetes, or like what did you work on before getting into Kubernetes?
So when I was first hired, I was a technical writer for 10 years, and I was originally in Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization when it was called that.
Yep.
So from pretty much the entire 3 series into 4. And then I worked in something that was like early OpenShift, and I worked on some OpenShift stuff. And then I worked actually with the Kubernetes community on their documentation for a little while. I got hit by a car and then kind of couldn't work on... Working on Kubernetes documentation, I found requires a lot of concentration, which I just wasn't able to muster. And so when I was kind of coming back to work, Red Hat had a project which they called C&V at the time, which became KubeVirt, well, which was KubeVirt, but would become the KubeVirt project owned by the CNCF as we know it. And so they needed like version 0.1 documentation. So I started working on that. And then I worked on a bunch of other stuff, and it was entirely providence. Luck. It's dumb luck landed me in this chair where I get to hang out in the community and talk to people and try and motivate people and yeah, just get to talk to people like you about this, what I think is a really cool project.
So what kind of use cases are you seeing from users, right? Like I've heard a lot of, this is for bringing legacy applications over, but I've also seen some comments saying, hey, this is just like general use, like people that need to have VMs and they want to have like the same platform. This is a great way to do that. So like what kind of use cases are you seeing? You're seeing a lot of like telecom and stuff using VMs, or?
Definitely a lot of telecom is interested. I'm not at all going to be, I'm not qualified to really talk about what it is they're doing. We had some really interesting telecom talks at our KubeVirt Summit last year, and I'd highly recommend, if people are interested in seeing what they're doing, the one from SK Telecom comes to mind, because it was like 5 minutes in and I was totally lost. It was really deep networking layer stuff. Super cool if you can understand it. We're hoping to see some more of that again this year for our KubeVirt Summit. I'll throw a plug to that later. But we have 4 main use cases. The first is the legacy VMs. This is the bread and butter. This is why the project started. No one wants to run multiple infrastructure stacks with multiple teams doing things differently. And so Kubernetes is the new hotness. People, I think, 10 years, people have been building container workloads. And so it's now kind of like the modern infrastructure. It's in a lot of places, it's very comfortable, but we still have a place for VMs. Some of them are, potentially 15, 20 years old. What if we can run those VMs natively inside the Kubernetes stack? Then we've got one way of doing things, one team that knows what they're doing, and we're just paying for one set of infrastructure. Over time, those VMs or the workloads can be containerized, maybe, but they don't necessarily need to be, and not everything can be containerized. I think we're kind of learning this in the industry especially in the last few years. It's like not actually everything fits into a container. There are still needs for virtual machines. So that's the big one. And then the 3 other ones. One is GPU provisioning. So slicing off the bits of large video cards. And so this is what NVIDIA used for their GeForce Now project platform, which I think is really cool. And I think another of our adopters, CoreWeave, also used for like high intensity graphics sessions, stuff like that. The third use case is it's like an adjacent project. It's called Capk, which is the Cluster API Provisioner KubeVirt. So if you're familiar with the Cluster API for Kubernetes, this is the same, except you give it a giant YAML manifest, which specifies the virtual machines that you want running this Kubernetes cluster, and then the flavor of the Kubernetes cluster that you want. and it'll build the Kubernetes cluster on virtual machines in your cluster. So then you've got multiple Kubernetes clusters, potentially of different versions or whatever, all being looked after by this one main cluster with the one administrator. Then your different teams have the benefits of, their virtual machines, so they're beautifully isolated. They're all namespaced, and they can have whatever they want, and then looked after by the one person with the one portal. And then the fourth use case, which we learned about a couple of years ago, never intended, so it's kind of cool to hear people using it like this, is if typically a Windows virtual machine inside of a pipeline. And so you need a Windows artifact in the pipeline. You can't necessarily have the Windows container generated. So the data comes along, the Windows virtual machine is created in the pipeline, takes in the data, spits out the artifact, and then VM gets blown away and the artifact continues on. So those are our four main use cases that we hear about.
It said Capk, C-A-P-K. So not Cappy, just Capk. That's actually pretty cool. So you're running virtual machines in Kubernetes. So you have like a Kubernetes cluster, and then you're running virtual machines on those nodes, and then running another Kubernetes cluster, and then you're giving that to someone else. So it's kind of like a virtualized Kubernetes cluster on top of another Kubernetes cluster. Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Using the Kubernetes API to get all that stuff going.
Nested clusters and tenant clusters. Infra cluster. Okay,
so infra cluster. So tenants and infra clusters.
Yeah. And so and you give it the one YAML manifest, and it creates all the VMs for it. I haven't looked at the project in a little while. I did the transcript for the demo a while ago, and so I think now it handles all like the kube config parsing and the SSH for you. I think it does that. But if not, it's relatively simple to kind of share them, and then that's it.
That's pretty cool. So you're still using like cloud init type stuff, and you're pointing it to like an image and stuff that you're using, and you're still using like the same storage, I'm sure, like for that. All right,
CSR driver, and you can export the VMs from the tenant cluster outside, so you can import it into the infra cluster or a different tenant cluster or anywhere else that you want in your Kubernetes cluster.
All right, so I've got a 200 gig Windows image that I want to run on Kubernetes. Should I start with that? Should I look for like, I mean, okay, I guess the big question is too, like, it's kind of a joke. You said there's like Windows use cases, like they're building probably their own Windows images. Is there a community supported Windows image for this? Like I know that there's cloud images from OpenStack, but it's like a very old image, like Cloud-Based IT or something did it. What are people doing for like Windows? Do you know? Like, are they just creating images like they would for VM infrastructure?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what people are doing. I mean, Windows, I think you've run into licensing issues. I think we have like a free to use Windows, like default Windows 10 image available in probably Quay or a container library somewhere. But yeah, I can't imagine people are using that apart from for test use cases. So to jump to your surprise question, your 200 megabyte Windows VM. Yeah, you should 100% get that up and running. 200 gig, whatever. What's a 1,000 bits between friends?
It's a little bit slow, but
I would like that's the cool thing about these kinds of projects. The cool thing about this ecosystem, right? You get the thing up and running. It costs practically nothing to get it working. And then you throw it in there and you see, and then you optimize a bit, and then you can kind of like build from there. It's like, does this work for me? No. And if it doesn't, there's a bunch of other projects that might be able to use together in tandem to kind of like get the thing that you want working. And that's super cool to be a part of, and it's super exciting as well.
It's great for engineers. Maybe not the businesses employing those engineers who want to go explore and have fun with everything.
I will just throw one caveat there. Your 200 gigabyte Windows VM, you will want to run that on bare metal unless you've got optimized like servers that are optimized for nested virtualization.
Okay.
Because there's no point running like does this work for me on a nested virtualization system or on like a container-based demo cluster or something like that.
So that leads to another question too. Are most of the users like bare metal? Do you know, like, do you have like a survey that you've seen, like, okay, most of our users are bare metal versus cloud, or I say bare metal on-prem, right? Like versus cloud. Like I know the telecom stuff are probably running this a lot, like in their own data centers or like colos or something like that. Like, have you noticed a difference? Like, oh, this is mostly just like on-prem stuff that people are using KubeVirt, or like, are they running AWS? And
it's funny. And if anyone's watching this video and does use it, I would love to hear from you, because that's a bit of data that we don't actually get to hear about. We get a lot of people who are interested in the project, and they tell me what their situation is. And then I often don't hear from those people again. And so I would actually love to know how people are using it in those regards. For the most part, we do say to people, like, what we support, what we recommend, highly underlined with probably an exclamation mark in parenthesis, is bare metal. And that there are some optimized virtualization cloud hosting, but as soon as you're talking about a nested virtualization system, you will have a performance hit. And so if maybe that suits your workloads, like maybe it doesn't matter, maybe you're not going to see that hit. It's entirely up to the people running. But yeah, we would definitely. And it's been funny hearing a lot more people when I say bare metal, like, that's fine. We've got the bare metal. We've got bare metal on-prem. It's like made a bit of a comeback, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's getting too expensive to do cloud stuff, and they're coming back for security and for just having control and access to everything. Okay, so say I'm on VMware right now. Is it an easy just like transition straight to KubeVirt? Like, is there stuff that gives me like an image? How do I do like an image store and all of that stuff? Is that part of KubeVirt, or is that on the roadmap, or do I need to have something separate for like images? Like I know the images are a little bit different to where like I'm using data volumes or I'm using container disks and stuff. Is that kind of like the image store that I would use? Like ideally, would I have like a container disk eventually for everything to where I'm running from a container, or am I always pulling an image from somewhere and then downloading into the data volume? There
are options. So we have it's in the KubeVirt project. It's not KubeVirt. It's the containerized data importer. So when you install KubeVirt, this is an additional install unless you're using the hyperconverged container orchestrator. I think I got that right. Oh, I think it's just the hyperconverged orchestrator. And that'll install the CDR with you. So that is responsible for importing, exporting. And so you can point it to an externally hosted or locally hosted, was it VDDK or VMDK?
It's VMDK. Yeah, but I haven't done VMware so long. VMDK,
I think. You can send shoot at that, and it'll import it, it'll convert it, and then it'll create the virtual machine that will run on top of that in KubeVirt. And you do the same for, I think, OpenStack images, QCOW2. Ultimately, it will convert everything into raw for that. So it'll obviously take a raw image. It'll prefer that.
Anything exciting on the roadmap for KubeVirt coming up? Like anything new that you want to talk about, or that you've seen coming out the next couple of months?
So I'm not going to be able to talk to you about like the technical things that are going to be coming out in version 1.3 because I haven't been looking. But what I can do is I can share a link with you. One thing that I'm excited about from a community point of view is that we now have, you can find this information for yourself. We have a SIG release repo and a SIG release team. And in that repo, you'll find our upcoming schedule to know when to expect it. You can find our support matrix, so you know which version maps to which version of Kubernetes. And more to the point of your question, we have it's not quite a roadmap, it's our pre-release notes. And so these are all the things that are currently merged that will be the next release that would otherwise have a release notes. And so you can kind of like get an idea. And this is something that I'm hoping to evolve later in this year as well, to get, like, that's phase one, and then phase two is to get a slightly longer view. What's the stuff that we've just kind of started to implement? And then hopefully an even longer view. It's like, what's the stuff that we're still talking about implementing? So the people like these kind of transitions still take, 6 months to 2 years kind of a thing. So that's the kind of, the line on the horizon, I think, is nice to be able to tell people.
And if anybody's interested in like what's coming in the future, or wants to see like demos and stuff like that, come to the community meetings, right? Or even the weekly meetings to see people demo things that they want to implement.
Come to the community meetings. It's every Wednesday in the afternoon if you're in Europe, in the morning if you're in America, and late at night if you're further east.
So if someone's interested in contributing, how do they contribute? And on top of that, would you say to people that are just like docs writers and technical writers to get in, to open source projects and start there? And then if they want to be a developer or something like that, they can kind of pick up, low-hanging fruit and get into it that way? Or what's your background perspective?
100%. How do you contribute? You can come along to our community meeting, which is every Wednesday. And I'll send you the links so we can throw them into the description. Our community repo, our community page has our calendar. It's got our Twitter account. It's got our, we've got a Google group mailing list, 2 Slack channels. And we've also got, we've actually got a few contributing pages. We've got a developer specific one. If you go to our user guide, our documentation, there is up the top contributing, and that's probably the most fleshed out. And I'm trying to make that kind of the more central one, because it points you to the CNCF contributing guide. It points you to our developer guide, and it also points to that CDI project I was talking about earlier. If you're looking for something a little smaller, then because KubeVirt is a huge repo. And also it points you to how you can contribute in non-code things. And I'm a non-code person, have a background in docs, would 100% love help in documentation, but also keeping our website and stuff up to date. So if you're, last week I was wrestling with HTML, something I haven't had to do in 20 years. I'd love to have people in the community who I can just kind of like tap on the shoulder and say, hey, look, you've got this background in web development. I'd love this help. 100%. If you're looking for getting into this kind of development work and you have skills in website or documentation development, I would very much welcome you with open arms.
I kind of made that like an aspirational question, but like also like if you're just good at docs, like there is a need for help with docs. There's a need for like everything. Like everybody's welcome. Like there's all kinds of stuff that you could work on. It's not just that people think, oh, open source work, I'm not a developer, I can't do that. It's like there's a lot of doc stuff that people need help with. Like developers will write something and then they'll write a little bit of docs, and sometimes you can make it a little bit easier to read, right? Like
even just reviewing.
Yeah.
Like reviewing is a huge part of contributing. And it's a massive time sink. And I don't think enough people give credit to people that spend at the hours and hours every week reviewing, because it's kind of like it's a little unsexy.
Yeah,
just putting the reviews out there, putting those comments. It's hard work. So if people are able to review docs, PRs, then that's a huge help. Absolutely huge.
All right. So what's the status of KubeVirt and the CNCF right now?
So we incubated almost exactly 2 years ago. And we're now preparing for our graduation submission. And so we're just kind of tidying a few things, and then it's like putting in for the security audit, and then putting the all-important PR to the CNCF. And hopefully by the next time I see you or talk to you, we'll have more information on that process, and maybe even the little graduated, but I do know that it's a long and slow process. So
thank you so much for your time, Andrew. Thanks for hopping on and talk to us about KubeVirt. Is there anything else you want to plug or anything you want to say before we finish this out?
Absolutely. Yes. So we have KubeVirt Summit. This is our big KubeVirt community event of the year. It will be held in June 25th, 26th. Our CFP is currently open. The CFP closes on May 20th. I'm going to throw links down the bottom. If you use KubeVirt, then I would love to hear how it is that you use it. I'd love to hear your user journey to how you got to you had the business case. How's it going? What's in between? Talking to people just recently at KubeCon in Paris, I think we've got a lot of people in the community who can answer these questions in a much better way than I can. It's like, how do you get to that point? And I'd love to hear from these end users who have done this so that others can learn from them. And I think that's a really important part of being in these kinds of communities.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for your time. All the information that we talked about too will be in the description. So I'll post some information about the KubeVirt Summit, GitHub for KubeVirt, and all that.